Hi, my name is Stephanie Thomas. I'm an associate professor of practice at the University of Arkansas in the United States. And today I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about an article that is coming out in Journal of Supply Chain Management that I co-authored with Monique Murfield of Miami University and Jackie Eastman of Georgia Southern University. And the article is titled, "I Wasn't Expecting That, the Relational Impact of Negotiation Strategy Expectation Violations." So I guess you could say that the interest in this topic goes back to when I first started in industry, almost 20 years ago. And before academia, I worked in a variety of roles in distribution and logistics and merchandise buying for a big box retailer. And one of the things I really loved about my job or the various jobs was the relational piece and working with my colleagues in other businesses and organizations on how to get things into the hands of the customer. And that was one of the things I just really enjoyed, was the kind of the soft side of the job. And so when I later went into my doctoral program and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for my dissertation, I kind of gravitated toward the buyer supplier or supply chain relationship area of research. And within that, I started reading some about negotiations because that was something that I had enjoyed and was a big part of my previous work experience. And one thing I started to notice was that a lot of the research on negotiations in negotiation research spans a variety of different disciplines and topic areas and arenas far outside of just supply chain. But a lot of that research focuses on negotiations as just a single one-time encounter, and heavily influenced by game theory and optimal strategy usage and things like that. But to me, I knew from my experience that the relationship is a big part of actually doing a negotiation, because you're doing a negotiation with somebody that you have a long history with. And so that's where I kind of started looking into doing research in supply chain negotiations within this broader context of ongoing supply chain relationships. My co-authors and I started this project. It really kind of emerged from a grounded theory study that I had recently completed. And so I had this qualitative research that said that relationship history is an important part of how you prepare and choose strategies to use in a negotiation encounter. And so there was kind of this model that started with relationship history and went into expected negotiation strategy usage, and then whether or not that strategy expectation was met or it was violated, and then what was the outcome on relational outcomes like trust and relationship specific assets and commitment and loyalty and things like that. And so I wanted to take that qualitative framework and quantitatively test it. And so what ended up emerging from the development of the project was that we developed a series of scenario-based experiments. It was a series of 3 experiments, and we were looking at what is that violation, if there is a strategy violation, what does that do to relational factors? And the kind of extra piece that my quantitative or qualitative research had brought out is that often there is what we call an ERF in the paper, an extra relational factor, is that something happens outside of that negotiation relationship that the buyer is in and have these expectations of a supplier. The scenarios were from a buyer's perspective of a future and upcoming encounter with a supplier. So the extra relational factors are something that happens. There's an organizational extra relational factor or an external extra relational factors. And these can be a variety of things. For the purpose of this research, we used a leadership change within an organization as the organizational extra relational factor. It could be a variety of other things, but we chose like a new senior leader coming in. And then on the external extra relational factor side, we used a raw material price change. So the price of cotton increased or decreased. And so when we put the scenarios together, we were using whether or not the supplier was expected to use a collaborative, or sometimes we'll call it a win-win negotiation strategy, or a competitive, or sometimes we'll call it a win-lose strategy. Negotiation research usually uses those as the two dominant types, often thought of to be on a continuum. And so we set it up that there was this ongoing relationship, and as the buyer is approaching a negotiation and planning for it, they either expect the supplier to use a competitive strategy, or they expect the supplier to use a collaborative strategy. And then we manipulated whether or not that expectation was met and measured what the impact was on the outcomes of the relationship. So theoretically, we use expectancy violation theory and attribution theory as kind of our theoretical foundations, as that negotiators, if there is a violation or something unexpected happens when they're in a negotiation encounter, that they want to try to explain the unexplained. And so each of those theories informed our hypothesis that we developed for the article, and enabled us to look at and explain what the results were. The 3 experiments was run separately with a separate set of current professionals as participants. And the first one was looking at what is the impact on trust of an expected collaborative or competitive negotiation strategy and a violation of a collaborative or competitive strategy expectation. Now, interestingly, trust was not significant in terms of a difference of an expecting a collaborative or competitive strategy. Now, when we looked at that, we thought that's where the relationship comes in. Is if you've done business with an organization and with a person for a long period of time, you have developed a set of expectations. And to be able to do business on a continual basis, you have to have some level of trust there, regardless of what the strategy type that they use is you got to trust that they're going to fill the orders, or they're going to ship the products that you want, and all those things. So while it was kind of somewhat surprising in the context of a close supply chain relationship, in having this expectation of a certain type of behavior, it wasn't altogether unsurprising. We did find that there was a significant difference when there was a violation of the expectations. So if you had what we would call a competitive strategy violation, because it was expected, that would mean they actually used a collaborative strategy. Or we would have had a collaborative strategy violation, which means that you expected a collaborative strategy and you got a competitive strategy. And so there was a significant difference in trust in that aspect, which was the kind of what we needed to keep moving forward with the next experiments. So for experiment 2 and 3, we used the manipulations of the violation of strategy expectations, and then we added in the presence of an extra relational factor, like I talked about previously. So in experiment 2, we looked at organizational extra relational factors. So we manipulated a leadership change. And then in experiment 3, we looked at the external extra relational factor, and we manipulated the price change of the raw material. And so interestingly, the violation of the strategy expectations, for the most part in both experiments, ended up being insignificant. In these 2, we used the relational outcomes of commitment and relationship value as our kind of relational outcomes to see what the impact of these factors were on the relationship. So neither one of those were significant in the violation of the strategies. What was significant was the difference when there was the presence of these extra relational factors, and whether it was a positive extra relational factor or a perceived positive or perceived negative. So we perceive it positively that there's a new leader that is promoting collaborative relationship building with their suppliers, and we perceive it negatively when there's a new leader that wants to play hardball and focus on lowest cost and isn't interested in promoting relationships. And so those were significant in both experiments, which said that the presence of these factors and being able to understand why there was a change, the interaction together, there were some significance and some insignificance. So it says that these external factors, being able to understand and decide and figure out why your negotiation partner is behaving in a certain way, that these factors can help with that, and it tempers your reaction to the violation, the strategy violation. So, okay, my partner has always been very collaborative. The supplier that I'm working with, if I'm the buyer, has always been very collaborative, and they come in one day and they want to play hardball and they're playing competitive and they're acting in a way that I'm not expecting. So based on the relationship, this goes against what I'm thinking. So theory would say that this is going to be a negative thing. What these extra relational factors do is they help me as the buyer understand, okay, I know I heard about this new leader, or I read a press release about this new leader that has these new initiatives, and maybe they're counter to how my partner has been acting previously. So I'm not going to immediately kind of throw away the relationship because they come in and act in a way that I don't expect. What I am going to do is kind of go, okay, I'm going to back up and I'm going to try to see, okay, how are they going to continue to respond? And then can I figure out how to kind of match this new expectation that's coming through? We found basically three kind of key takeaways from this research, and we think each of those have both theoretical and managerial implications and lead into some future research potential. So the first one being that relationship history impacts the reaction to a negotiation strategy expectation violation. So this idea that previous research has kind of really focused, for the most part, on isolated events instead of looking at them in the broad context of the relationship and how that overall relationship impacts the actual negotiation encounter is kind of a big gap in what we've normally been doing in research. And so we need to do more research that looks at the holistic kind of relationship side of it. And it's not easy to do that, but that's where we need to push for the next level. And on the managerial side is, as you prepare for negotiations, whether you're on the buying or the supplier side, is having an understanding that whoever you're meeting across the table has expectations about you. And if you're going to violate them, you need to know that there's probably going to be a relational impact, and need to kind of, with knowledge, go into making any kind of change from what previous behaviors. And doing that will help kind of, and you can also communicate if there has been a change on your side to kind of help understand potentially any changes in behaviors. The second finding is that negotiation strategy expectation violations have a negative relational impact on long-term supply chain relationships, but it's not going to be the same for all relational type of outcomes or variables. So overall, the impact of a violation can be negative, but not all variables are going to be the same. And so some of our theories help kind of describe why that might be the case and why there might be differences, but there's opportunities to do future research to find out more about that. And this research is being presented from the buyer's perspective. There's also opportunities to switch around and do research from the supplying side, and what happens when a buyer changes their strategies and expectations. At this point, we can't kind of take it to both sides, and so that's an opportunity for future research. But what we're finding is most of the time, buying and selling partners like consistency and predictability, which a lot of us do just even in everyday relationships. And so if you're not going to do that, that there is going to be a relational outcome. It might be a strategy depending on where you want that relationship to go in the future, but realize that there is going to be an impact. And so the third key takeaway is that the presence of extra relational factors like we're talking about the raw material price changes or new leadership within the organization, have an impact on relational variables. And in the second two experiments, this was the big impact, is that there were significant differences depending on whether these ERFs, as we call them in the paper, were considered to be positive or negative, and that attribution theory informs why that may alter some of our norms and expectations in our relationships. Again, for future research, we looked at this from just two examples of organizational or external extra-relational factors. There's a wide variety of other topics. We mentioned a few of these in the paper that would be potential future research avenues. And on the kind of managerial side, you want to stop and think, is there something going on in your, whether it's the industry, within your organization, within your team, or something that might alter how you're behaving? And if so, maybe you can tell and communicate that to your supply chain partner so that that helps them cognitively process this, and that can kind of dampen some of their effects if you are going to make a violation of what their previous behavioral expectations are. In this case, we looked at negotiation strategies. There's a huge need for some more relational focused supply chain negotiation research, and I'm happy to kind of be part of creating this this area of research, and hope that others will join me soon.